There was once a little boy who wanted to meet God. He figured that it must be a very long journey to wherever God was, so he took a suitcase and packed in that suitcase some snacks and a six-pack of root beer. He made his way out the door and had journeyed about 3 blocks or so from his home when he saw in a park an elderly woman who was just sitting there on a bench looking at some pigeons. He was getting hungry by this point, so he went over and sat beside the woman and opened up his suitcase and began to eat one of his snacks. He glanced over at the woman and he figured that she must be hungry too. So he offered her a snack. She reached out her hand, gladly took it, and beamed over toward him a great big smile. He thought she had the most beautiful smile, and wanting to see it again, he offered her one of their root beers, which she gladly took and again gave him a smile. And so the two of them sat there throughout the day, snacking, drinking root beer, while saying nothing to one another. As the day drew on, it began to become dark, and the boy realized that he was getting tired and was time to head back home. So he packed up his suitcase and he got up to start walking away, when he turned around and ran over to the woman and gave her a great big hug. She gave him her biggest smile ever. The boy then went on his way home. He entered into the house beaming with joy. His mother saw him and said, "What did you do today that made you so happy?" And the boy said, "I sat in the park eating lunch with God." And before his mom could say anything further, he replied, "She has the most beautiful smile I've ever seen." Meanwhile, the woman arrived at her home, and she too was beaming with joy. Her adult son saw her and said, "Mom, what did you do today that made you so happy?" And she said, "I sat in the park eating snacks and drinking root beer with God." But before he could say anything, she then said to him, "He's a lot younger than I had expected." I've entitled today's sermon, "The Quest for Happiness," because it is indeed a state of mind we all want to be in, and yet it remains so elusive for so many of us. And you have to wonder, why is that the case? If you were to ask, I think, the average person what it is they want most out of life, they would respond, "All I want is to be happy." And we would believe them, wouldn't we? But if you were to ask the average person, or should I say, watch how the average person lives out their life, what you'll discover, I think, is they don't live by what they believe. Ask the average person, what's most important to you, family or your work? They'll tell you, well, my family, of course. But watch where most people, or at least, shall we say, the average person lives their time. They believe that if they go to work early and come back home from work late, having expended all sorts of energy and coming back in a tired state, they're proving to their family just how devoted they are to them, so that they can make the money to go out and buy all the stuff they have seen advertised in order to make them happy. So, is the average person confusing happiness with working to live or living to work? Are we being sucked in by the advertisers into believing that if we buy their products, we will be happy, and believing it to the point that our possessions possess us? Is it any wonder that we live in a consumer society? Ask the average person which is most important to them: the love of their family or the approval of of strangers. Not only would they say the love of their family, but they might even be put out with you for asking them such a question. And yet, what do we do? If a family member does something in public that we feel embarrassed about, we scold them for fear of what a stranger might think. Most of us, I think, will admit when we've had a bad day, what do? We take it out on those who are closest to us, even though they may well have had nothing to do with us having a bad day in the first place. Now, it's wonderful to have these supportive relationships, but when we abuse those relationships in such a way, that's far from what any of us want. Ask the average person what they want most out of life, and they'll say, all I want is to be happy. And I'm sure we would believe them because it's what each of us want as well. In fact, most of us work very hard at trying to be happy. We read books on the subject. We may go to classes of various types on the subject as well. And if we believe the advertisers, if we buy their products, then we'll have the happiness we want so badly. Come to think of it, have you ever seen a product being advertised by someone who looks sad or miserable? One of the products that are out there right now, I think is a perfect example. It's a mop. And in these commercials, there's a whole series of them. It usually features someone mopping their floor, but they're not just mopping their floor. They are exuberant, they're happy, they're joyous, they're dancing around. And so you pick up on the message. If I buy that mop, I will be happy. Or perhaps you think to yourself, if you're living with someone else in your household, and they are, shall we say, the primary mopper, if I buy them that mop, what an incredibly thoughtful gift that would be. Just look at the joy it would bring them. So in either event, you go out and you buy the mop. You bring the mop home, you figure, I've got to try this thing out right here and now. So you put the thing together and you start mopping. Okay, joy and happiness anytime now. And you're mopping, but nothing happens. You're not feeling the joy. So you go back, you figure, okay, I must have put the thing together wrong. You look through the instructions, but you realize that no, you have indeed put the mop together correctly. And once again, you've purchased another product that has not lived up to its promise to make you happy. Unless, of course, having clean floors does it for you, right? So you figure, well, what's the ultimate thing out there that could make me happy, that I could purchase? And you remember all those wonderful lottery commercials. Now, I know this is hypothetical because none of you, of course, have ever gone out and bought a lottery ticket, right? But you are probably aware of the commercials. And the commercials usually depict a scene something like this. People sitting in a beautiful tropical paradise. Not a care in the world. They're all smiling. They're all happy. The sun is basking over them. The waves are coming in at their feet. And you hear in the background what you presume to be the sounds of their former lives prior to winning the lottery. The sounds of perhaps a traffic jam, of cars honking, of squealing brakes. You hear perhaps the sound of a busy day at the office, of all the stress and concerns, and then you see the banner, just imagine. And so you do. You imagine, and you get the message. If I buy the lottery ticket and I win, then happiness will be mine. But if you're like me, and if you've read or have seen the stories of people who have won the lottery, you'll discover from them that winning the lottery, that instant easy cash, does not actually give them the long-time happiness, long-term deep joy that they so desired. It just didn't do it for them. And so you begin to wonder, well, could it be that we are not meant to be happy? Could happiness be sort of like, well, eternal youth? Something that no matter how hard we work at it, is just not meant to be ours? Could that be the case, we wonder? In a reading from Ecclesiastes, we heard, I know there is nothing better for them than to be happy and enjoy themselves as long as they live. Also, that it is God's gift that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. Our God is a loving God, and all the gifts that our God has given to us are meant to be enjoyed, especially the gift of life. We are to enjoy it. We are to be happy from this gift. And so since life is to be enjoyed, why is it so many of us are unhappy? Could it be that we're looking for happiness in all the wrong places? People who do have lots of money, or shall we say even power, know something that many of us do not know and perhaps will not even believe. And that is that wealth and power do not satisfy what our souls hunger for. They do not satisfy what will bring us true happiness. We can own all the mops we can ever dream of. We can even win the lottery. But those things will not bring to us true, deep happiness. Our souls do not hunger for wealth or power or fame. As a matter of fact, those things can oftentimes lead to more problems than they actually solve for us. Studies have found that once a person's basic needs have been met, such as food, shelter, security, warmth, once those things have been met, having a better shelter, having better food, having an increase in those things will actually not improve our chances for being happier. Let's face it, we are ever so fortunate to be living in Canada. We have freedoms and security that people around the world can only dream of having. The vast majority of us have our basic needs met and then some. And yet, are we anywhere near as happy as we should be? For many people, especially young people in, say, their teens and 20s, they figure that if they have the fame and fortune of their idols, then at last they will be happy. But it seems that a week doesn't go by in the news in which some actress or actor or rock star who is extremely famous and wealthy and young doesn't end up having to go off for rehabilitation for drug abuse or alcohol abuse. Why? Because what they had thought would make them happy, fame and fortune, did not bring them happiness at all. And so they tried to go to the quick escape. They tried to go for the quick instant high of the drugs, only to find that leads to even greater misery for them. While our bodies require the necessities of life, they require food, clothing, shelter, security, our souls, the vessels in which we carry that happiness, hungers for ever so much more. They hunger for meaning, an answer to the age-old question, what is the meaning of life? What's the meaning of life for you, for you, for you, for me? So surely, the bumper stickers can't be right, can they? The bumper stickers that say, the one who dies with the most toys wins. As a minister, I've officiated at hundreds of funerals, and not one time have I ever been asked to share on behalf of their deceased the amount of money in their bank account or a list of the toys they have managed to accumulate. And as for power, I've had the privilege of being with people when they have been drawing their last breaths upon this earth. And not once have they ever said, I wished I'd spent more time at the office so that I could get that promotion and have more power. Is it possible that one of the primary things that separates people from animals is our ability to ask, what is the meaning of my life? Since after all, people and animals go about doing the same basic physical activities day in and day out. The famous psychologist Carl Jung said that human beings have two basic aims. The first he calls the natural aim. This tends to take place during the first couple of decades of our life, in which our primary concern has to do with decisions around employment, decisions around marriage. And during this phase, other people have more to say about our lives than we do. But then we move toward the second aim, and that, he says, is a purely spiritual aim, to satisfy our needs of that. He says, quote, "This is an absolute necessity for the health of the soul." I wonder, could this be what is referred to today as being a midlife crisis, in which people go through their lives, they work hard at trying to achieve whatever it is they're trying to achieve, and then they reach a point when they say, is this all there is? I still don't feel happy. I still feel miserable. I still feel empty inside. And so they enter into a depression. And in that state, they may well do things they might not otherwise do. Stupid things, silly things. You know probably what about I'm talking, right? And so we go into that downward spiral, don't we? In the case of young actors and actresses and rock stars, I think they enter into their midlife crisis very early in age, because at an early age, they have achieved what they believed would make them happy, only to find out that wasn't the case at all. Happiness still eludes them. Perhaps the so-called stars, just like them, we may turn to therapy, realizing and remembering that the word psychotherapy actually means the care and cure of the soul, because it is indeed our soul that needs caring for. Well, a well-trained therapist can help us to unravel and untie some of our emotional knots, but what is at stake here, what is at the heart of it all, it's not psychological at all. What we need to be concerned with is our soul. Our reading from Isaiah tells of a person with a purpose. "The Lord called me before I was born, while I was in my mother's womb, and he named me." And for what purpose? Verse 3 has it. "And he said to me, you are my servant Israel, in whom I will be glorified." The purpose of creation is to glorify God. And we are a part of that creation that has the honor of having been created in the image of God. And so we are to reflect that image to one another, to the whole world, and to God. In verse 4, the transition occurs. "But I said, I have suffered in vain. I have spent my strength for nothing and vanity. Yet surely my cause is with the Lord, and my reward with my God." So the question which now arises is, how are we to do this? As we heard in a reading from Corinthians, the body is not made up of one member, but of many members. In other words, we all play an important role. Jesus is no longer, of course, in the world, in the physical body. And so the church, a living body, has been created to carry on the work of Christ, to carry on the mission of Christ of going out into the world and spreading the good news of the love of God to all we meet. And so as the physical body of Christ in the world, we are to literally be the hands of Christ to do his work, the feet to run his errands, the voices to carry out his message. I'm convinced that it's not so much our fear of death that haunts our lives so much as it is the fear that our lives will have been lived without any meaning whatsoever. I believe the best barometer as to whether or not our life has meaning is not to go out and ask other people, but rather to look deep within ourselves. For only deep within ourselves do we know Am I living the life God has called me to live? And only then will we have the meaning we so badly need. Such a realization, let's face it, it can be overwhelming. But then let us remember the words of Jesus who said, "My yoke is easy, and you'll never be called upon to do something for which you will not be equipped." One of the things that brings me the greatest joy in ministry is when I get to be part of and witness to someone who tentatively at first realizes that God is calling upon them to do something. And then to see them literally flourish before you as they realize and discover gifts within themselves they never knew before that had even existed. Again, at this point, let us turn to Jesus for an example here of his words. One of the greatest claims he ever made, we heard in our reading from John, in which he says, "I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." There's nothing wrong with an abundant life that includes wealth, that includes power, that includes fame. But the thing is, we mustn't make those things the focus of our life. Because whatever we focus on becomes the center. And whatever is the center of our life becomes our God. Whether people believe it or realize it or not, everyone worships a God. The question is, which God is it you are going to worship? Is it the God of wealth? The God of power? The God of fame? Fill in the blank. Or is it the God? The God who created us, the God to whom Jesus prayed, made the focus of his life in serving God throughout his life. God, the very one who created us, obviously knows us best, obviously knows what should be the center and focus of our life, and so we should turn to God to find that meaning, and through that meaning, the happiness and joy will come. We don't become happy by pursuing happiness. We become happy by living a life of meaning. The happiest people you know are probably not the wealthiest or the most powerful or the most famous. I suspect that the happiest people you know are the ones who work hard at being kind to others, loving to others, helpful to others, while they're going about doing their God-given tasks. And while they're busy doing those things, happiness sneaks into their life and fills their life to overflowing. We don't become happy by pursuing happiness. Happiness is a byproduct. It's never a primary goal. To paraphrase David Henry Thoreau, happiness is like a butterfly. The more you chase it, the more it'll fly away from you and hide. But stop chasing it and busy yourselves with more important things than the pursuit of personal happiness, and it will sneak up on you from behind and perch on your shoulder. Amen.